Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jonasz Lewiński. In the wake of growing uncertainty on the international stage, the European Union has launched its ReArm Europe initiative, an ambitious plan which could see up to 800 billion euros being mobilized to boost security and defense. However, the question of where this money will be coming from remains open, with the Polish Presidency laying the groundwork for a new financing system known as the European Defence Mechanism to make it all happen. How can the European Union overcome existing bottlenecks and bureaucracy to become a major player in the defence sector once more? Joining us now is Bernhard Otterstein from the Polish-Canadian Chamber of Commerce, expert in the field of investments, new technologies and strategic planning. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello.
So let's discuss the basics of this European Defence Mechanism. What is it all about and how would it improve the way in which Europe is actually seeking out money to finance this ambitious plan for rearmament?
I think that the European Defence Mechanism, the EDM, is an innovative tool that has several reasons to be proposed. And those include that it can be done sort of off-balance sheet for some of the countries that are already heavily indebted, and in that sense provide an alternate source of funding. Another key reason for the new mechanism is that it also allows defence funds to be pooled by all European countries, not just in the EU, but also those who are in NATO or even beyond NATO.
Would that also include Ukraine, for example?
It could. It could actually, apparently, from what we know about the plan so far. And the other
it has a burgeoning defence industry, right? I mean, this is a country that's very innovative and likewise could make some contributions there.
It could. It could. Now, of course, you know, the relationship to NATO, Ukraine not being in NATO, would have to be examined, and I'm sure there are many considerations around that. Those are important issues. Another key reason for the new EDM, of course, is that part of it will be to seek unification and to get equipment to be interoperable and to have not to have 7 to 12 different types of tanks and as many howitzers and different types of equipment between all the European countries. There needs to be some uniform, I think. There need to be some standards there. And
but to what extent, actually, would that be mandatory for individual countries? Because we do know that up to now, our countries made their decisions individually. Poland, for example, has the issue that you've mentioned, i.e. having many different types of tanks. It has the tanks from South Korea, the US and Germany, apart from the ones that were made back in the Soviet era that were being phased out and transferred to Ukraine. Yes. But some people are afraid that this uniformity would bring about the erosion of decision-making processes at a national level. Is there a risk of this happening?
I believe that every country will still be allowed to produce or procure or deploy its own, whatever equipment it wants. I think the European Defence Mechanism, however, seeks to provide a common platform of equipment that is commonly owned, actually. So it's really like an equipment pool that can be deployed to various countries at, for a user fee and that kind of arrangement. So that really changes also the procurement, which would be then a common procurement for that equipment that's part of the EDM.
So that would streamline the process, right? Would that also bring about the change in the proportion in which Europe is buying equipment from other countries? I'm asking this because there is the ongoing discussion about American weapons, US-made equipment. Should Europe still rely on it, and to what extent?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, there's no security in the world right now for any Western country without the United States as part of NATO or as part of the Western Alliance. I think that American equipment obviously is very uniform and in that sense interoperable and useful. But I think the European goal is also to start to standardize those standards. Even if different countries produce parts of equipment or their own versions of equipment, that they would move closer to interoperability with it.
And to reignite the European defense industry. I mean,
exactly.
Europe has made lots of backsliding in this regard. Back in the Cold War era, we had many more factories capable of producing tanks, ammunition. Right now, we still have to rebuild that.
That's right, and that's one of the key reasons for all of this, really. It's also to reduce absolute reliance on the United States. Not to say that the United States is not a critical element to European security, because it is, and it will continue to be. But I think the Europeans have understood that they really need to, as you say, rebuild their own defense industries, and in doing so, to make them more compatible with each other, as they also try to strengthen their own commitment to the joint security arrangement.
So some critics of any initiatives based on the European Union are saying, okay, wouldn't this result in some bureaucrats saying, okay, we are not going to buy American weapons because of political reasons or something like that. Instead, we must rely on the domestic industry. However, because this industry is still starting up, your tanks manufactured in France, for example, or Germany are not going to be ready before the end of the decade. So that's the pessimistic vision that we can see often from some commentators. To what extent are such fears justified?
Well, the fact is that it takes years to ramp up production, to produce, to actually design and be ready to produce something, then to ramp up production and to actually produce it. It takes years. It can take decades in some cases, or at least a good part of a decade. So I think to procure equipment in the meantime from other sources is the only way to increase security, and that will include obviously the United States. It may include Korea, South Korea, and others. So I think that there's no question that needs to be done in the interim while Europe rebuilds its defense industry.
So it's complementary to the existing systems. Would it also facilitate more ambitious projects, such as, for example, air defense systems? Some of these are really expensive and might be difficult to obtain if it was just one country applying for it. There was the European Sky Shield initiative, for example, which would have systems not available to many of the countries in the EU in the past, actually being procured for this purpose.
Exactly, and that's part of the new architecture that is being considered and planned, and it is critical for Europe to contribute to those types of really sort of elemental aspects of defense. That includes also satellite communications, obviously, you know, the missile defense that you just mentioned, and other things such as the ability to you know, logistically airdrop troops wherever they're needed and that kind of thing, which is usually left to the United States these days. But I think as the United States also recalibrates its priority and its requirements around the world, it will be very happy to see Europe taking a larger sense of responsibility for these key tasks.
Do you think incentives for dual-use equipment, like, you know, having a civilian industry manufacturing drones, for example, would that also come into play here? We've seen that in Ukraine, many of those drones are not typically military grade, but they are retrofitted with equipment that makes them a formidable tool on the battlefield. And some Ukrainians are actually saying, look, they are addressing this to the Europeans. You're still preparing for a war from the past. We're fighting a war of the future. We know it, and the Russians know it, but how about you? Are you prepared for, like, you know, shifting the emphasis on drones, for example?
I think that a key part of the whole new defense architecture will be a very, very fundamental evaluation of what is needed and what is not needed, what the trends are, what works and what doesn't. And of course, it's important to remember that civilian industry, even if it's not dual use, it's still, defense and civilian uses feed off each other, and innovation thrives in an environment where both are very active. And so whether they're dual use items or just, you know, complementary, I think in terms of innovation, that can all help. And the EU absolutely must look at what is needed these days, what is obsolete, right? So that will be part of the whole process, I think.
Looking up beyond the question of financing, what do you think the European Union should do when it comes to deterrence as such? We know that the Baltic states, for example, highly vulnerable. They don't really have that much strategic depth. And some say it's very difficult to defend them unless there is a potent deterrent that simply shows Russia that, okay, if you try to attack them, you're going to regret that. Because if they do attack, defending these countries would be really difficult.
Yes, and so far I think it's been the classic role of NATO to help with that. For example, Canada has the enhanced forward presence in Latvia. The Germans are in Lithuania, and there are other countries around, taking part in that type of security architecture. And the NATO concept is fundamental to Europe's security, obviously, and it will continue to be.
Do you think it's under threat right now, especially when it comes to the eastern flank?
I don't believe so. I think that is so fundamental to our joint security that there's no question about it.
Does the Trump administration acknowledge that too?
Of course. They know that, and the fact that there are some new ideas floating around and some new plans doesn't really undermine that important security arrangement. I think that also the Trump administration is trying to bring Russia back to the table, rather than just saying, okay, we're just, that's our adversary and we want to secure ourselves. That's normal. But I think also bringing Russia back to the table to say, okay, well, let's talk about things. Let's see how we can, lessen the tensions and stop the war. Those are important steps that are being taken in spite of everything.
Can't Russia still be trusted, though? I mean, we had various deals when it comes to, for example, limiting, arms control. Right. And Russia just, kept breaking these. So the US withdrew from them, saying, okay, so you didn't actually comply with that. Why should we?
Well, I think it's a matter of rebuilding that trust. And the only way to do it is actually by sitting down at a table and starting to talk about it. Of course, who is at fault and everything that both sides will be saying probably, that the other side is at fault. But I think that the key thing is to actually start talking again and to get back to diplomacy as a way to provide us with fundamental trust and security.
And very quickly, do you believe that the Russians are actually acting in good faith right now? Many say they don't.
And that's a really tough question. I think they have shown some willingness to sit down. Certainly, Minister Lavrov in some interviews recently has made that clear, that they want to sit down with the Americans. And I think Steve Witkoff's travels back and forth are helping to set the stage for that. I think President Trump is also very interested in that, and obviously President Putin. So let's hope that does take place and that those discussions happen. I think it's very important, and thinking back to 1989 to 91, when so many changes happened, the end of communism, the end of the Soviet Union, I think now we have a similar moment in history where we really need to, sit down as human beings and try to work out our differences.
Bernhard Otterstein was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And I'm Jan Ślewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please do stay with us.